Bon, rebonjour. Nous allons commencer les sessions de cet après-midi avec le professeur Haiqing. Il enseigne à la Texas Southern University et ses recherches se portent surtout sur la relation des écrivains d'Amérique latine et la Chine. Et donc, il a écrit sur Borges, mais aussi sur Augusto Roa Bastos, le grand écrivain paraguayen, et Vargas Llosa, et fait le lien entre ces deux cultures, parfois avec des résultats inattendus. Donc, voilà. À vous.
Merci. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Cheng and Professor Mangel for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor. The title of my presentation is Borges and China, a bond that the universe needs. In an interview on Radio Televisión Española in 1980, Borges said that if he had only 1 year to live, one of his plans would be visiting China, a country that he loved and that he actually had known for a long time through so many texts. The following 2 poems also allow us to see Borges' interests in Chinese culture. The first one is The Go, on the ancient Chinese board game, Weiqi. I had in my palm a tiny disc of the 361 that are required for the astrological game of Go, another chess from the Orient. It is older than the most ancient writing. Its black and white variations will exhaust the time. Men will be lost in it, like in love and in the day. I thank my guardian spirits for this revelation of a labyrinth which will never be mine. The picture is very famous from last year when the AI, AlphaGo, which is artificial intelligence, he won over the world champion of Weiqi, which is Ke. The next poem, which also focuses on an item from China, displays more of Borges' knowledge of Chinese civilization, the lacquer stick, which was written after Borges bought a hand stick in Chinatown of New York City. Maria Gaudama found it. I look at it. I feel it part of that empire, infinite in time, who built its wall to construct a magic country. I look at it. I think of that Zhuangzi who dreamed about himself being a butterfly and who wondered after waking up if it was the butterfly who had dreamed about being a man. I think of the artisan who worked on the bamboo. I do not know if he is Taoist or Buddhist, or he studies the book of the 64 hexagrams. We will never meet. Something, however, ties us. Both poems depict Chinese civilization as having a majestic and mysterious nature, with images and allusions to its diverse cultural products. And both poems are about an inspired poet in his immersive exploration of the complex between a Western writer and the Eastern culture. To begin, the poem The Lacquer Stick will help me walk through some paths towards an understanding of Borges' narrative about China. 3 words I have marked, in particular, serve as key points for my discussion, which are bamboo and muralla, the Great Wall, and El Libro de los 64 hexagramas. So the bamboo, the Great Wall, and the book of the 64 hexagrams. Bamboo, a common plant seen across China, has long been represented in fine arts and literature. The bamboo stick in Borges' poem is a central image and a key word. And I quote from the poem again. Besides its authority and fitness, it is curiously light. Whoever sees it would notice, and whoever notices it would not forget. I look at it. I feel it part of that empire. I think of the artisan who worked on the bamboo and bent it so that my right hand could fit well. This type of highlighting or focusing is what we usually miss in Chinese poetry about bamboo. Now, let's look at an example from Bai Jiyi, poet of Tang Dynasty, who lived between 8th and 9th century. Do we have any Chinese scholar that would like to read the Chinese version so people can hear the original sounding? Any Chinese scholar that can read it? Go ahead.
夜雪白居易，笔亚亲枕冷，复见窗户明。夜深知雪骤，时闻折竹声。
Thank you. So I will skip the English translation. I guess it's already there, everybody can see it. And now, next example from Su Dongpo, poet from Song Dynasty. And I think we have some experts about Su Dongpo here. You want to do it again?
定风波，苏东坡。莫听穿林打叶声，何妨吟啸且徐行。竹杖芒鞋轻胜马，谁怕？一蓑烟雨任平生。
Gracias. So, don't listen to the rain in the woods beating the leaves. Why not sing and walk slowly? So light, bamboo stick, and straw sandals are better than horses. Who'd worry? Let some rain shed through the journey of life. Another poem, also from Su Dongpo. Evening view of Haiqing River.
Je pense qu'il manque un caractère dans le titre. Moi, c'est 惠崇春江晚景之一。竹外桃花三两枝，春江水暖鸭先知。
Thank you. Beyond the bamboo, peach blossoms 2 or 3 branches. Spring water is getting warmer, ducklings know it before us. Okay, in the above pieces, among others from classical Chinese poetry, bamboo is in the background, contributing to the overall imagery of the backdrop. It is poetically ignored. In other words, bamboo is never the theme. The theme is always beyond the bamboo. In fact, Borges had already noticed this distinction from another perspective. Borges once read from Gibbon that the Koran, the best book of the Arabs, does not mention any camel. So he commented, if there had been any doubt about the authenticity of the Koran, the absence of camel would be the best proof that it is Arabian. It is written by Muhammad, and Muhammad as Arab does not have to realize that camels are especially for Arabs. Here, with the example of bamboo, I guess we could tease Borges by the same token that even if you write about camel and place it in the focus of your narrative, you may not be automatically enrolled in a cultural relativity with the Arabian world. In his bamboo poem, Borges illustrates an intuitive yet metaphysical image of China composed of an art craft, the Great Wall as the symbol of an ancient empire, its philosophy, and its classical books. However, the narrative perspective seen in this poem is not unique as only for a representation of China. A similar pattern, for example, is found in Borges' story Funes el Memorioso, Funes the Memorious, which depicts an erudite who never loses his memory on any page of any books he read or any details in his life, and therefore possesses an infinite universal vision of the world in both metaphysical and literary senses. In the story, when Funes sees a glass of wine, he thinks of, and I quote, all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up a grapevine. He knew by heart the shapes of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882, and could compare them with, in his memory, with the mottled streak on a book in leather binding he had only seen once, and with the outlines of the foam raised by an oar in the river Negro the night before the Quebracho uprising. So that's the French translation of what I just read. This transspatial, multidimensional perception of the world displays similar or almost symmetrical images to those in the poem The Lacquer Stick. We see a man-made product, hand stick and wine, elements from the nature, bamboo and grape, a book, Chinese classics, the book of the 64 hexagrams, and a book in leather binding, a possible image of a Western classic. And a true historical event, the building of the Great Wall in China and the Quebracho Revolution in Uruguay. While this comparison may not be so kind to Borges' creative mind, one may argue that above all the descriptions of Chinese culture, the poem is about a sublimation of a simple, trivial daily experience into the glamour of Eastern culture. It may be read as simple as that. Okay, another symbol for Chinese civilization in this poem is the Great Wall. The essay, The Wall and the Books, explored this piece of history vividly in a Borgesian way. And I put some additional information and remarks from Borges, which is not part of my presentation. Upon reading that the first emperor of China, Shi Huangdi, ordered the construction of the Great Wall and also ordered the burning of all the books before him, Borges stated that the two gigantic operations were issued from one person and were in a certain sense his attributes, inexplicably satisfied me and at the same time disturbed me. The object of this note is to investigate the reasons for that emotion. End of quote. Borges stated that for him, the two feats possess a power of myth, and as in his narrative, he detected the possibility of creating a myth out of this history, which may well explain his feelings of satisfaction mentioned in the beginning of the text. In this essay, along with the representation of a Borgesian reading, the vague image of a Chinese emperor is carved into a resemblance of a Western mythical figure, a Zeus, who would exercise his power in bold and naive ways to serve his darkest personal desires. So if we read Borges' recount of Shi Huangdi as a myth, we can easily find its counterpart in China, which is the 2,000-year-old legend of Meng Jiangnu. In the time of Shi Huangdi, Meng Jiangnu's husband was conscripted to build the Great Wall. The lady traveled to bring winter clothes to her husband, only to find out that he had died and was buried under the wall. Meng Jiangnu wept at the foot of the wall for 10 days, and the wall of 800 leagues then collapsed to render the body of her husband. Between Borges' Shi Huangdi and China's Meng Jiangnu, we see the exercise of absolute power versus the power of narrative or storytelling as resistance. We see the dream of an empire to last forever versus a humble individual's dream to survive. The construction of the wall with destructive forces of state violence, and the destruction of the wall with constructive motives, love and mercy. In this sense, Borges may have, unknowingly by himself, created a new version of the Great War legend for us. Now, let's go back to the poem, El Bastón de Laga, the lacquer stick. And I quote again. I think of the artisan who worked on the bamboo. I do not know if he is Taoist or Buddhist, or he studies the book of the 64 hexagrams. Yijing, or Haiqing, one of the ancient Chinese classics, or the book of the 64 hexagrams in Borges terms, is also envisioned in the display of Chinese civilization. Commonly known as the earliest classic work in Chinese history, or the head of all the scriptures, Yijing may not be mentioned just randomly in this poem, but with a highest reverence. A clue can be found in Borges' reading of Asian classics, according to himself, in two categories: the literary works and the divine books. The latter, according to Borges, are ancient books that deal with the origin of other books and the creation of the universe, such as the Quran, the Bible, the Vedas, and Haiqing, or Yijing. He said, if we read an ancient book, it is like we read all the time that runs between the day it was first written and us. Borges believed that the notion of classics is not related to certain merits or genre of a book, but rather refer to those books that a nation or a people choose to read and read repeatedly with mysterious passion and loyalty through history. I believe Andrew and Professor Saucy already mentioned this quote earlier this morning. Therefore, the extent of readership is a key factor for the definition of the classical. While in Borges' own case, reading, misreading, partial reading, and writing have all provided access to the classics. When discussing these classic books, Borges provided very limited explanation on their content. The absence of camel in the Quran, discussed earlier, is one example. Another is China's Yijing. One of the classical works edited by Confucius. I'm not an expert in this, but according to what I read, Yijing contains two parts. One is the Asian part with the diagrams, triograms, and the other one is a narrative text. But Borges, I guess he only focused on the figurative part of Yijing. What Borges stressed about Yijing is not its narrative text, but the drawings of the 64 hexagrams. This is the, how to make the, so this is the 64 hexagrams, and this is the so-called 8 triograms. I actually don't understand them, but these are their image. So he focuses on this display. Borges used this symbol from Yijing to represent China, and in particular, the mysterious nature of its civilization. His concise and general representation of this Chinese classic forms contrast to his detailed and passionate presentation to another classic work, the 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights. Borges suggested that the most important issue in Western history is that they found the East and the sensation of the East. And for Western literature, the translation of the 1001 Nights is the most important event. Borges believed that this book, better than any explorers, gave the West the sensation of both the Islamic East and the Far East, and thematically and aesthetically expanded the literary territory for the West. And I quote, I'm sorry, I think I missed a page. Let me catch up. And I quote, "The 1001 Nights is not something that has died. It is so vast a book that it is not necessary to have read it because it is already a previous part of our memory." Oh, the image is a Chinese version, Chinese publication, translation of the Arabian Nights. So this remark summarizes the significance of the Arab classic for the West as well as for Borges himself. The inspiration from the 1001 Nights, such as textual infinity, or the circulations of time and space and narrative, have all been represented in his other fictions. One example is in The Garden of Forking Path, a story widely considered as of a theme of China, in which the protagonist ponders, "I had been asking myself how a book could be infinite. I also recalled the night in the center of the 1001 Nights when Queen Shahrazad started to tell the story of the 1001 Nights as text, with the risk of arriving again at the night upon which she is referred, and thus unto infinity." It has been argued that The Garden of Forking Path contains an ambitious metaphysical imagination of the Chinese classical novel Dream of the Red Chamber or 红楼梦. But when trying to depict the vast construction of time and space in the magical text, Borges needs to use 1001 Nights as reference. One possible reason is that his reading of 红楼梦 was not facilitating an image of a masterpiece as conspicuous as the Arabian Nights. Borges once did not sound as an interested reader of 红楼梦, and I quote, "The novel proceeds in an irresponsible or insipid way. The secondary characters are everywhere, and we do not know who is who. We are like lost in a house of many patios." He seemed to be more interested in the historic background of the novel's writing. And I quote, "In 1645, the Chinese Empire was conquered by the Mandarins, people analphabetic and equestrian. It happened what would inexorably happen in such catastrophes. The crude winners fall in love with the culture of the conquered, and the splendor of arts and letters were fermented." In China, however, readers would now tend to accredit the Mandarins for the success of this classical novel, which was in fact a forbidden book in the Mandarin Qing dynasty. Borges provided a similar mode of reading in his essay on Liangshan or 水浒, as he commented. Oh, by the way, Dear Kauber von Liangshan, this is the book that Borges had read and made a presentation on. And I quote, "In the beginning of the 13th century, the Chinese Empire was destroyed by the Mongolians. One of the ulterior results of this devastation was the appearance of theater and novel in Chinese literature. In this period, the famous novel Story from the Waterfront was written." Readers may point out that the Mongolians, due to their relatively small population and ruling limited to 98 years only in China, were not able to influence or be influenced by the Chinese culture in a significant way. The narrative literature in China would find itself in greater development during Ming Dynasty. However, when a reader questions about Borges' possible misreading or partial reading, he may also want to recall the writer's statement, "Mi fin es literario, no histórico," My goal is literary, not historic. Such reading of Chinese history may eventually come from a literary scope set by Borges, where lies the success of his own works, and where history and fiction do not have clear borders. One could observe in this sense how far Borges could go as a writer keen of reading, and to what extent his writing can confine or expand or remodel his reading. From this perspective, we can reapproach the 2 poems discussed in the beginning. Intuitively, both poems are on Chinese art crafts, which were new or unfamiliar to Borges. He represented the 2 unfamiliar items, weiqi and bamboo stick, using references that are familiar to his literary world, respectively the labyrinth and the Chinese civilization. Yes, in certain circumstances, China is a familiar matter for Borges, or in his world. So, looking at these 2 poems again, what is the goal but a labyrinth? And how to appreciate the bamboo stick, but through the review of a brilliant civilization? These 2 familiar matters for Borges were used to reflect not on 2 particular items from China, but on Borges' emotion towards a more general value of humanity. The poetics of a new matter dwells in the recounting of the familiar ones. Another example of using China as a familiar matter can be found in his short story, Historia del Guerrero y de la Cautiva, Story of the Warrior and the Captive. The story has 2 protagonists, a Lombard warrior who came to attack the East Rome city Ravenna, but eventually decided to fight in its defense in the Roman time. And an English woman who joined an indigenous tribe on the Pampas in 19th century Argentina and who refused to return to her compatriots. In the narrative, Borges, a reader of the Lombard warrior, is looking for something comparable. So he said, I thought fleetingly of the Mongol riders who wanted to make China an infinite field of grazing and then aged in the cities they had longed to destroy. This is the quote. But Borges immediately turned away from this clue by saying, no, I wanted to find something that had been mine, which then is the story of the English woman told by his grandmother. Like the 1001 Nights, which helps reflect the masterpiece Hong Lou Meng in his story The Garden of Forking Path, in Story of the Warrior and the Captive, Borges used China, a familiar matter, to reflect on the theme and promote the development of a new plot. It is like an axle that turns the story from one side to the other and thus gains vitality for the narrative. The brief indication of the Mongols in China implies Borges' economics of narrative. As he stated in the same text, La mia es la más económica. My way of storytelling is the most economic one. Okay, so far we have reviewed the images and the significance of China in several sample texts of different genres by Borges, in connection either with Chinese culture or with a more universal value that he tried to convey for us. In some, Borges and China are bound by a labyrinth of narratives, universe of texts, and a writer's ambition, as Andrew mentioned in the morning, to measure infinity of writing with abstract and metaphysical approaches to different cultures. Okay, I would like to go back again to the 2 poems and use Borges' own words to end this presentation. I thank my guardian spirits for this revelation of a labyrinth which is not mine. We will never meet. Something, however, ties us. It is not impossible that the universe needs this bond. Thank you.